We're live.
Should they start talking?
Yeah, probably.
You're up.
Welcome, Smyrna First. Thank you for your patience. We have had to change locations and we are now sitting on the porch of the Reverend Dr. Roy E. Stowe. I am so excited to be coming to you live tonight from Covington, Georgia. I'd like to welcome you to our annual United Methodist Women Annual Ice Cream Social, and I'm so excited to be fellowshipping with you virtually tonight. I can't see you, I can't hear you, I can't hug you, but I know you're there with us, and thanks for joining us. We're blessed to have you this evening. Thank you. I want to shout out to our Pastor Derek and his staff. Thank you so much for always being so supportive of the United Methodist Women at our church. So thank you to him. And then, without a doubt, this digital team. Y'all, we are so fortunate and so blessed to have them at Smyrna First. So thank you to Jesse and Catherine and Kristen for making this a reality tonight. Thank you so much. You know, as I was planning this evening, I kept getting the message that, and I shared this with Dr. Stowe, I kept getting the message and theme tonight should be joy, something about joy, joy in the storm. Anyone out there that's listening could use a little joy in the storm right now? Yeah, I sure can, and I'm sure there's many of you that could raise your hand also. I think all of us with all of the midst of the storm surrounding us, with the pandemic and the social distancing and the protesting and natural disasters, we could go on and on and on. Lots of storms. But I believe that God wants us to have joy in our lives and in the midst of the storm. You know, he mentions it a lot in the Bible. In the NIV translation, it's mentioned 218 times. I think he meant us to get that straight, that we should be a joyful people. And in Proverbs 15:13, it's one of my favorites. A glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart, the spirit is crushed. So have you ever walked out the door in the morning when you weren't feeling like you really wanted to get out and about, put a smile on your face? Doesn't it make that day go a little bit better? I think that's what he's telling us, to have a cheerful face. It makes the world feel a whole lot better. And also Proverbs 17:22 is another favorite of mine. It says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. A cheerful heart, a joyful heart is good medicine. I believe that means not only physically is it good medicine, but emotionally and spiritually. I am so excited. I think if our hearts are filled with joy, then I believe that we can face all the fears and anxieties, COVID and social distancing and all of the storms. If we trust that God will give us, trust in him, that God will give us comfort and peace and hope for the future if we are filled with joy. So ladies, sit back, get your ice cream and your cookies ready. We are about to have a night of fun and laughter. I've asked Catherine Davis to come and offer us a word of prayer. Catherine.
If you would join me in prayer. God, thank you so much for this time that we get to come together, whether it's together in person or virtually, that we get to come together in fellowship. Thank you for the work of the United Methodist Women, all that they do for the church and for the world. I pray that you continue to be with us tonight and every day, and that you would help us to embody the joy that is in Ecclesiastes and throughout the Bible, the Simcha that you pour into our lives. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Catherine, for those words. Ladies, you know, I started off this year as your president of the UMW in January, and we had an executive committee meeting. We had some great plans, some fun activities, programs, some great ideas for spiritual growth, and we got through about February. On February 9th, we had our UMW Recognition Day at the church, and then the pandemic hit, and we have not been able to be back together since. So I'd like to take just a moment to give a shout out to two ladies who made our Recognition Day a real success. Reverend Chiloa Hale, and the Reverend Dr. Beverly Marshall Goodell. Thank you, ladies, for providing the message that day, a beautiful message of letting your light shine, which is our theme this year for the United Methodist Women. Let your light shine for justice. And I want to let you ladies know that we made a gift to missions to the United Methodist Women on your behalf as a small token of our appreciation for your service. Thank you so much. I've got two quick announcements. First of all, Faith Talks. Some of you have already heard me talking about this, but it's a great program. It's a great way for us to stay connected with other United Methodist women throughout the country, throughout the world, really. The Faith Talks is a monthly conversation with the United Methodist women. It's hosted by Jennifer Farmer out of our New York office. And the themes and resources are basically what empowers us to put faith and hope and love into action. And if you're like me, it's the one thing that I can put on my calendar and it doesn't get canceled or postponed. So if you'd like to join us, go to umw.org and click on the Faith Talks and register there. The next webinar will be Thursday, June the 11th. And it's going to be, the topic for that day is going to be education inequity. It's going to be a great time. So umw.org, click on the Faith Talks, and then register. The second thing I want to, I've been asked to share with you from our president of the Atlanta Marietta District. Jennifer Godfrey is teaming up. She's actually our North Georgia UMW Social Actions Coordinator, and she has asked us to, they are asking for our help. It's not a United Methodist Women program, but they are asking us to team up with them in joining them for a program that is called Women in Transition. It is sponsored by the Alpha Omega Society here in Atlanta, which is a non-profit interfaith organization that supports women impacted by the criminal justice system. If you have a passion and might be interested in serving, if you're asking yourself how you can serve, what you might do to make a difference, join us on Saturday, June the 20th from 10 to 1 o'clock for a virtual mentor and volunteer training session to join in with these women at Alpha and Omega to join the Women in Transition, to help these ladies as they come out of incarceration to feed back into the real world. And tonight we are very blessed to have Mike and Amy Wallace, who will come to us with one of my favorite songs, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore You.
Joyful, joyful, we adore you, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before you, opening to the sun above. Joyful, joyful, we adore you, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before you, opening to the sun above. Melt the clouds
us to the joy divine. God our Father, Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other, lift us to the joy divine. God our Father, Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other, lift us to the joy divine.
Joyful, joyful, we adore you.
Hearts unfold like flowers before you. Joyful, joyful, we adore you. Hearts unfold like flowers before you.
Oh God, our Father,
Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other.
Thank you, Amy and Mike. What a beautiful, beautiful song. One of my favorites. But ladies, I am so excited. This is what we've all been waiting for. I am excited to introduce to you tonight our guest speaker, the Reverend Dr. Roy Stowe. She is a great storyteller with a healthy sense of humor. She worked as a surgical nurse for many years before transitioning into the pastoral ministry. She earned a Master of Divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, as well as a Doctor of Ministry degree from McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. She has served many churches in North Georgia and is now a retired elder in full connection, currently serving at Red Oak United Methodist Church right here in Covington, Georgia. Reverend Stowe is the mother of 2 grown sons and has 11 grandchildren. She has also brought with her tonight her sidekick, and I think all of you know him, our very own Reverend Derek Porter. So, Reverend Stowe, Reverend Porter, the stage is yours.
Usually there's police involved when Stowe and I are together. I met Stowe in Covington 17 years ago. Most of you heard this story. She interviewed me to be the associate and youth director at Covington. She told me something at supper tonight that made me laugh. Don wants to know why he's not with us tonight. Don, it's because we don't like you. That's what it comes. We're finally done with you. You're retired. We don't have to put up with you anymore. No, it's Don. We'd love to have you, and we'll reach out to you and set something up. But tonight we're going to spend some time with Stowe. We're going to tell some stories, but it's also a time for us to be thinking about. For me, I have been richly blessed. My ministry, the trajectory of my ministry, the depth of my ministry, has been changed by Dr. Stowe, and I am where I am and who I am because of Dr. Stowe. And so one of the ways that I want to impact the kingdom, the Methodist Church, the denomination, North Georgia, Smyrna, is with partnering with Shiloah, partnering with Catherine. Shiloah and Bruce are the old heads on staff now, and as Catherine is coming into ministry, she's finished up her first year of seminary. She is now a certified candidate, and on July 1 will be appointed to Smyrna First in a student appointment role, and she will be officially the Reverend Catherine Davis at that point. The bishop and the cabinet have set that up, and so one of the best gifts I can give Catherine as she starts her ministry is to connect her to Dr. Stowe. The richness of ministry that she has had, the power of her ministry that she has had, the connections that she has poured into preachers all over this conference is remarkable. The conference would not be the conference that it is without Dr. Stowe. Through her time on the Board of Ordained Ministry, she has been a faithful leader in the teaching parish at Candler, and Emory, and has been a remarkable servant in her churches. And she got screwed out of a good retirement. She didn't get a retirement. She got screwed out of that, and it wasn't fair. And she's still working and still serving at a church right now. And quite honestly, she's owed that, and she can't say it, at least not publicly, but I can. And it's one of the things that's been most painful to watch, her to be treated as a female pastor in a way and in a large church that a man would have never been treated. And quite honestly, it's still, we got a long way to go. We got a long way to go. And so, Catherine, soon to be Reverend Davis, we are inviting her to come and sit. I'm going to step out of the way and sit, and Stowe is going to start off by talking about what ministry was like when she came in and what it was like now, and just kind of leaning in, pouring into Catherine as they go back and forth, and Catherine talks about coming into ministry, and I'm sure Stowe's going to work some great stories into that as well. Come on, Catherine.
Come on, Catherine. Well, let me say first of all that, there's an old spiritual that goes, wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. And I think that's very true for me. It's been almost 30 years for me in ministry, and I am not sorry, and I have not been sorry, and I don't think I ever will be, that I made a change. I made a change from nursing. I was working in a very specialized area in the operating room, and so I went back to school. I didn't have a bachelor's degree. I did have an RN, and so I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree in nursing, and then my master's degree, and then my doctor of ministry, and so I had 3 times as much education, worked twice as many hours, made half as much money. Never been happier. But it is calling, and it has to be that, or you won't survive it. I will tell you that. I do believe that it's harder for women in ministry, even today, than it is for men. But I think there are times when women make it harder on themselves. And so here's a few little one-liners. Don't ever let them see you cry. You grit your teeth and stand up and put your shoulders back and look them straight in the eye. And if you have to, let them know that you are the most powerful person in the room when it's a room full of men, because all you have to do is whisper that they have been inappropriate, and you got them. I mean, it's not hard to figure out. But the main thing I'll say, and probably the truest thing I say, is most of my male colleagues have been exemplary. I'm going to say that they many times treated me like one of the boys, and that was a compliment. That was nothing but a compliment. I did an ICE group, an Institute of Clergy Excellence group, with 8 other people, and the other 8 were guys. And the Lilly Foundation said, "Don't you want to get a girl?" And I said, "Heck no, man. These boys have carried my baggage through airports. I always have a room of my own. Why would I want a girl in there?" But there are things that are difficult. And the things that I would say to you is, don't lose your passion and hang on to your calling, and don't go into any church expecting that church to conform to you because you're a female. You go in and preach strong. You preach the gospel of Christ, because that's what you're called to do. Social justice you cannot get away from. You must participate, but that's not your primary focus. If you can convince people to follow Christ, you won't have to worry about social justice. It will happen, and they will love you. And once they love you, they just about always will love you. Derek referred to being cheated out of a retirement. That was over social justice issues, it was not handled correctly or by the book. I will be the first to say that. But here's what you have to do, particularly if you're female, but for all preachers, here's what you have to do. You have to stop thinking about they didn't do this or they did that or this wasn't my fault or how can we fix this and all those things. And then you have to plant your feet and say, okay, where do we go from here? And no matter what happens and no matter how much of it happens, you are called to preach the word of Christ. And that is a privilege and an order. So go do it. Nobody can stop you from doing that. Just go do it. Do you have questions for me?
What was the hardest part of ministry?
For me, you'll have family that follows you around, and that's a blessing and a curse, because you have to think about more than you when the bishop says you're going here or there. My boys were grown, and so I had the luxury of saying, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, I'll go. The hardest part of ministry, let me use Derek for an example. Here was the hardest part of ministry for me, coming in early. When I left Covington a full elder, taking a $12,000 pay cut to go to my next appointment. When Derek left Covington and he came in at $12,000 over my head when he came into Covington. When Derek left, he was a provisional elder and he got a $12,000 raise to leave Covington. And then the bishop called me and said, that church he's going to is just a mess. He said, Stowe, buy him a cup of coffee and sit down with him and see if you can help him with finances. They're just a mess down there. And I said, he's making $12,000 more than I am. And nobody seemed to care. Twice more, I was moved to a church, and I was told one time, I got to send somebody down there, and I don't want to waste this appointment on one of my good males, and they need a good preacher. So I can't afford to lose one of my good males. So go down there and see what you can do with this church. The next time, it was this church is at a crossroads, and it's either going to make it or it's not going to make it. If it doesn't make it, then I've destroyed a good male pastor that can do well in the conference. If it does make it, that's great. You'll have a great appointment. So go see what you can do with this church. And let me tell you, it only makes me mad enough to want to do well. I mean, I say, okay, watch this. And then you go to work and roll up your sleeves and grow a church. Now, I have never been to a church that I didn't consider it an honor to slide my arms into a robe and walk to that pulpit. So if the boys don't want it, we'll be glad to take it. Don't like it, and I don't think anybody would, except for the fact that it was an opportunity. And all of that is not the bishop's fault or the cabinet's fault or the Methodist Church's fault or that sort of thing. Our congregations had to get used to seeing skirts in the pulpit. And that's a hard paradigm to shift. So you just go shift it and then move on. But it was hard because my own self-worth said, I'm not as valuable as this guy or that guy or the other guy. And then there were times that I was placed on committees or other things because I was the token woman. And that doesn't do much for your self-esteem. So you got to dig deep and say, this is where I was called, and it was the Lord who called me there. And when you get that in your gut, they can't hurt you. Just go to work and have fun and do well.
So what have been the best teaching parish experiences that you've had as a teacher? Because Catherine is going to be doing teaching parish.
Oh, you're going to be doing teaching
I am,
parish?
yes.
Super. I'm going to be doing teaching parish again, too. unless Tom Elliott calls me after the program tonight and says, no, you're really not. It's watching the hope of the Methodist Church in those, not always young people, but new clergy as they come through. And watching them start when they preach, okay, but not great, or they preach, you know they're going to make a great preacher someday, but there's some timidity there. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, they're leaving, and you know, and they're going to be one of the strongest preachers in North Georgia. That is great fun. Seeing them go through the board and hearing them when the phone rings after they're finally done with teaching parish saying, Dr. Stowe, will you read my papers before I turn them in? And those are great honors and great fun to do. But I have great hopes for the United Methodist Church because of the clergy that are coming in years after I did, and what it means to the conference to have that fresh, new experience. And it's also a privilege to be able to say to some of them, if you don't change these things, you will never make it. And then watch them change them and watch them succeed. The object is to get everybody to succeed for the sake of the kingdom. So those are fun things.
Right now, Catherine serves in a very metropolitan area, a very city mouth area. Talk to Catherine about the tractor days.
You like the tractor days? Well, I'm a country girl. I was born in the country, and Candler tried to get it out of me. As you can hear, that never worked well, and I finally got it in my head and heart that it was all right to be country. When I went to Chamblee, I said, welcome to Chamblee, I'm so glad you're here, and home folk, we're glad you're here, and if you're visiting with us, yada, yada, yada. And I was told after I did that I shouldn't say folk, that's not how you do that. And so I decided that to make a good impression on the new church, I would say that differently the next Sunday. And the next Sunday I got up and said, home folk and visitors alike, we're glad you're here today, because that's who I am. That's what I do. One of my favorite appointments was Chamblee, but another favorite appointment was Inman. That's between Griffin and Fayetteville. Out in the country, still a lot of farmers out there. We had the Delta mechanics. Peachtree City had the Delta pilots. And that makes a difference. Derek can tell you, he served out there with me, and you go into a meeting where there's pilots and mechanics and there's going to be a fight. You have to make sure you set your committees differently. You have to be smart. But one Sunday morning I walked into church and there was no men. No men. There were some young boys, some teenage boys, and some old men, but no men. And I said to one of the members there, where are all the men? And she said, we all got hay in the field and there's a cloud coming. I mean, there's a storm coming this afternoon, and if we don't get our hay up, we'll lose our hay. Well, let me tell you, the part most preachers don't understand about that is if they lose their hay, you lose your hay, because there's nothing to go in the plate if they have to go buy hay for the herd. So I cut the sermon short, not too short, but cut the sermon short, ran over to the parsonage, pulled on a pair of overalls, and said to the women as they were leaving, I said, stop by here and pick me up. I know you're taking lunch to the field. So we would go to one field, and the farmer, the owner of that field, would get off the tractor and I would get on, and he would go and eat lunch, and then he would come back and get back on the tractor, and we'd go to the next field and I'd do it again. And we did it all day, and all of that hay was secured, was up, was dry, and was saved. They loved me down there because I knew how to ride a tractor. And if you go someplace like that and you don't know how to ride a tractor, You find somebody that you trust and say, will you teach me how to drive this tractor? And you'll have them right in the palm of your hand. There's a moonshiner down there. I won't tell you his name. Oh, by the way, Matt's got some strawberry moonshine going at his house.
I'll give him a call.
Okay, give him a call. So, this man had a bunch of kids, no education, and I said, Mr. Betzel,
Not gonna say his name though.
not gonna say his name, what made you decide on this? He said, I had to feed my kids. I just had to feed my kids. Good man, I loved it. Well, they had a big tractor show, not a tractor pull, but a tractor show down there. And I mean, it was huge. There would be people from all over the country down there. And they set up a still to distill water. But so the children would know how moonshine still worked. The part I hadn't figured out yet is why it was important for us to teach the children how to make the shine. But we did. So he was down at the creek, everything else was on the upper level, and I walked the ridge and I said, you need anything down there? And he said, can you come stoke the fire for me to go eat lunch? Sure. So I scrambled down the bank and got down there, and he stoked it up pretty good, and he said, just watch it, it starts getting low, here's the wood. And I said, I got it. So off he went to eat lunch, and then I began to hear people saying, is that the preacher running the still? And it was. Now, he didn't go to church much. As a matter of fact, I don't know that he was ever regular in church. And about 3 weeks after the tractor show and everything was cleaned up, I looked up one Sunday morning, and he came in the back door, brand new pair of overalls and white shirt. And I stopped what I was doing, because I was already into the service, welcomed him, and said, I'm so glad you're here. We've been saving you a place. And he said, well, I figured if the preacher could run the still, that I could come to church. That's ministry. And that's a lot like country folk think. If you buy in with me, I'll buy in with you. Now, several months after that, he came and found me and said, I got to go to the doctor. It's not going to be good news. I wondered if you could go with us and help us interpret what the doctor says. And I did, and the doctor said there's nothing we can do, and it won't be too much longer. And so I helped him understand exactly what they were saying and made sure he did. His daughter did. And he said, I'll take you to lunch for driving to Atlanta. And I said, I don't know, I don't feel much like a party now. I said, let's do that later. And so he went with his daughter, and they went back to Fayetteville, and I finished my business in Atlanta, and I went back to Fayetteville. Tuesday morning, the telephone rang, and he said, I got cat head biscuits and stricoline and some gravy for breakfast. Will you come and eat with us? I said, heck yeah, I'll be right there. So I ran over to his house, and he had invited several people, some from the church, some not. And the first Tuesday of every month until he died, he cooked my breakfast. That's ministry. That's what it's like to live in the country. I love the country. I never thought I'd like the city, but when my church was located inside the perimeter, I learned to love it there. And I just told Derek just a little bit ago, but I got a cow show Saturday at the FFA camp, because some of the kids at my church are showing cows, and I'm gonna be there. I mean, that's better than a football game. So you adjust. You make those adjustments, and it may smell like cow manure to you, but it smells like money to them, and it smells like love to me. So there you go. What else can I tell you?
How do you embrace ministry and motherhood? Because I'm going to be new to both.
Well, my kids were older, so good for you. And by the way, just so you can update your stuff, is 15 grandchildren now. and four
Congratulations.
great-grandchildren. So that's why I went back to work. I don't want to keep all them youngins. But the calls that I would take, unless it was a hugely important, focused meeting, the calls that I would always take would be the calls from my children to make sure they were okay and what was going on. Now, they need to understand, and you need to raise them to understand, that this is my job. Just like any other job, this is my job. And so, come Sunday morning, I did hold one of my grandchildren through a sermon one time. She couldn't understand all that, and I wound up holding her while I preached to keep her quiet. But I never had little ones that were my own that had to be there, so I can't help you much with that, except to say a mama is almost always going to love her children more than she loves life itself. And if there came a time I had to choose, I don't know that I could, because my ministry means that much to me. But my boys made great fathers, and one had 6 and one had 5. And literally, that's one of the reasons I'm at Red Oak. I don't want to keep all them young'uns. They just keep having babies, and I love them, but I don't want to keep them. So I go to work.
How did you find pastoral authority as a young female?
I had an advantage again. There were a few like Martha Forrest that went ahead of me that established it, and I watched and patterned. The other part is I worked in the operating room, and when I started into medicine, nurses were usually female and doctors were usually male. As a matter of fact, I remember when the dressing room changed from male and female to doctor and nurse. But the doctors could get mad in the operating room. The patient was asleep, and they'd fuss and cuss and carry on and pitch fits and bully nurses and do all those things. And I learned very quickly that I had the knife. I was the scrub nurse, and if I hid that knife, they could go no further until I said they could go further. And by that I mean, if they're pitching a fit, it gave me control enough to say, you're not going to yell at me like that. It's not good for you, it's not good for me, it's not good for the patient, so let's just get along and get this done. You also have to show that doctor respect, because I couldn't have finished the surgery if he had walked out of the room. And so that helped me. That really helped me. And when you do a good job, it's hard to be denied the leadership. 2 things I did. One of them, I'll tell you both of them, but y'all can't think bad of me. I put all of my credentials behind my head, wherever I was. When I set my desk up, all of my credentials went up. Every little piece of paper I ever got went up in a frame. And if they were going to argue with me, they were going to look over my head and argue with all of that. The other thing I did was I began to collect autographed baseballs. And I took 2 of those and put them on my desk, very prominently on my desk. And when a chair of trustees or a chair of the board came in to argue with me, I would lean up and take those 2 balls and I would put them in my hand. And without ever saying a word, they understood that I was in. That I had 2 just like they had 2, and I was in. You can edit that if you want.
It's live. We can't edit live.
Well, that's what I did, and I can show them to you.
Speaking of baseball, let's tell them about the Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth picture and why that's significant.
I like sports. I've always liked sports, and I like the psychology that goes with sports. And for Christmas one year, Dr. Martin gave me Babe Ruth, that season of the Yankees where those great leaders were there. And Babe Ruth was leading them out on the field. Now, I know I'm not a romantic person, and I know that Babe Ruth drank too much and probably beat his wife and had all these other worldly sins swirling around him. But he could play ball, and he could lead that team. And showing him leading that team out onto the field, the psychology of winning, of being a leader to a team of winners, and not having to fight for it, just having to be good at it, creating that leadership meant the world to me. That's in my office, either upstairs or at Red Oak. I can't remember where I put it when I came home. But yeah, that's a good one.
Every time Jen and I go somewhere, when we were at Cooperstown, I look for that print. I have tried to find that print anywhere.
I'll leave it to you.
Well, I want it before 30 years from now.
Well, I don't know. That's a good one. There's some real, and even theology behind that. The worst of these that are able to lead the best of these, and some real theology behind there too. So yeah, I like that print.
How did you find your authentic voice while also combating the stereotypes that might be held against you?
You know, again, I got comfortable with myself, and the good news about being country like I am, and I mutilate the King's English, and I know that, but I'm comfortable in that country style of talking, in that simple way of getting a point across. I can preach differently. It doesn't sound as authentic. But the good news in that is I can go to the Waffle House and order without a menu and fit in with everybody there. Or I can go to the Ritz-Carlton and know to ask for a black napkin if I've got on a dark skirt. And so it has to be a little bit of both. I stopped trying to be either or and moved into a both and got comfortable in my own skin.
Talk about the both and. Let's close with this. Talk about the both and either or conversation and how that's meant for you in your ministry. Because that was one of the things you trained me on. That was one of the things that you really turned me around with.
That's one of the things I tried.
Don't ruin a good night.
I had the privilege of studying with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I had him in a seminar with lots of people, but I also had him in a small group. And in all of the reconciliation talks in Africa that Tutu ran, he used a both-and theory. And he's the one who taught me it doesn't have to be black and white. It can be both and. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It can be both and. And as Christians, we really need to stay in the gray part of that time and let the tensions pull at us to grow. Paul stayed in the gray. And Paul both and a lot. And it really helps us to hear our entire congregation when we can go to both and. Now, sometimes it's just wrong, and there's nothing you can do but say that's just wrong and that has to change. But most of the time, the both and works. Are we done? Did you say we were done?
Well, if you got more.
Well, I just want to tell a few funny stories.
Come on.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about children's sermons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
This may be the part we need to edit.
It's live.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go.
I won't mention names, except it was Christy Ring. And at Covington, we did this renovation right before Derek didn't get in on any of this. It was already standing and functioning well when Derek got there. But I mean, this is a pre-Civil War sanctuary, and so we're doing this renovation there and knocking houses down and carrying on, and cut the fig tree, and some of the members had a fit because we cut the fig tree down. And you can usually outsmart them if you'll just think about it. So when they started pitching a fit about the fig tree, I got the youth to go up there with some big old tin cans out of the cafeteria and plant those little shoots that were under that fig tree, and we sold those things. I mean, we made money for a summer trip selling fig cuttings out from under the fig tree. But anyway, part of our objective was to enlarge the chancel and then enlarge the choir loft. Well, remember, this is pre-Civil War. So the spindles that went around the chancel area were hand-turned. And you knew that because the lip on them would be a little bit different. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, but you could see that it was different. Well, we hired artisans to come in and draw them out, and so they could turn more to put back in there when we enlarged it. Cost thousands of dollars. So we took the old ones and put them in the newly enlarged chancel area, and we took the new ones and put them in the choir loft area, not as easily seen. Good match. Probably the third Sunday after we were back in and got everything going, little girl, her grandfather was the chair of the building committee. He knew how much that had cost, and she came down for the children's sermon and stuck her head through two of those spindles down there, the old ones. And Dr. Martin was sitting in the chancel area. He knew her head was caught, and he was just slapping the arm of his chair, dying laughing. I couldn't get her out. I tried to get her out. I tried to do it inconspicuously. Finally, I turned around and said, "Mr. Billy, she's got her head caught between these spindles." He came down the aisle and said, "Hot damn, Christy, I don't know whether to cut the spindle in two or to cut your head off." And the children scooted out the children's church. He finally got her loose. Her little ears were red where he pulled her out. And Don looked at me and he said, "Now what am I supposed to do?" And I said, "Preach behind that, Dr. Martin. That's all I can tell you." She also decided one day that she was going to pray us out. So, stop, I'm going to pray us out. So she said to the congregation, "Put your hands like that and bow your head and close your eyes." And they all did. And she said, "I pledge allegiance to the flag." Went all the way through the Pledge of Allegiance and then said, "Amen." You can open your eyes now. Those were fun children's sermons. There's more.
Tell the one that you know I'm thinking about right now. The one that you kind of on the edge of whether or not you can tell.
Well, okay. I think you're talking about the little girl that Josh Roberts, who's now over at Maple Avenue, so not too far.
And Marietta right down the road from you.
Yeah, not too far from y'all. Was my associate. Great guy. He was country. He was from Social Circle. I knew he was smart when I met him. Did a great job for me. Well, he was doing a children's sermon, and the sermon that day was on pride. And so he said, "Do you know what pride is?" He said, "Well, is there ever anything that your parents have told you they were proud of you for?" And this little girl said, "My daddy told me that he was proud of me because I was Cougar of the Month." Well, I knew where this was going. And I just sort of stopped. And he said, "Is that the name of your school?" And she said, "Yeah, we're the Cougars." So he's worked himself out of here, but he wouldn't leave it alone. Well, is that why your daddy told you he was proud of you, that you were Cougar of the Month, because your school mascot is the Cougars? She said, "Yeah, but he said my mama was the best cougar." And I said, tell me your mama and daddy's name. Right over there too. And Josh got tickled and couldn't get untickled, and finally he said, finish this. And I said, oh no, mister, you got yourself out of this. Get yourself out. But you have to be careful what you ask if you're doing children's sermons, because it'll bite you.
Let me do two more.
Okay.
And I'm gonna flip us now.
Okay.
Talk about Bishop Jones for a minute and your relationship. And I've got somewhere I want to go with it. So
Okay, that's a good one.
yeah.
I could stay here all night, and it's my house, and so. But I know these people are probably getting tired. Bev Jones, Bishop Bevel Jones, served Decatur, served St. Mark, served a lot in our conference, and then went on to be a bishop. As a matter of fact, he was the last bishop North Georgia elected before Jonathan Holston. Well, he was teaching when I was in seminary, and about the time the ark landed, and he was a great social justice person. And so I fell in love with him. There was a shooting at Heritage High School. I don't know if any of you remember that or not, but I got called out of his class one day to come to Heritage to help with that shooting. Well, I was out 3 days because that was such a mess, and I was helping with them, and the bishop gave me a free pass. But he said, you've got to tell the class about this when you get back, and I did, and we became great friends, and I would watch him at annual conference as he got older, and if he was carrying a robe, I was so afraid he was going to get caught up in that robe and walk on it, and that I'd wind up going to fetch him and get him back to his room and those kind of things, and we just became great friends. When the bishop began to have some circulatory dementia, he had to be taken care of, and so he wound up at Bud Terrace. After a long illness, he wound up at Bud Terrace, and I would go and see him at least once a month. And then that went from once a month to twice a month to once a week to finally every day as he grew weaker and weaker. And I loved his stories. I mean, you could learn so much from his stories. Some of the students didn't like it because he didn't have a lesson plan and all that kind of stuff. That was an A at Candler. I mean, if he was telling stories and you were listening, that was an A. That was stupid. I mean, don't be stupid. That's a free A. Besides which, you could learn from his stories. And so I made fast friends with him, and David and the rest of the family was very kind to let me in when most people couldn't get in to see him, and I appreciate them sharing their dad with me that way. But I sat with him one day and I said, Bishop, the time is coming closer, and you're going to outrun me to the throne of God. What do you want them to say? Tell me, and I'll make sure they say it. What would you have them say? And I was waiting to see if it was something he declared as a bishop or some policy change or whatever. And he said, make sure they know that I was a champion of social justice. And I said, I will. And I did. I made sure David knew that, and I made sure other people remember him that way. But he was a great wit. There's a book he wrote called One Step Beyond Caution, and it was about the civil rights, and it was part of his life, but civil rights movement, and then the movement with the gays and lesbians as they came into focus and those kind of things. And he was indeed a champion of social justice. He taught me so much. Will always be in his debt.
How many years have you done teaching parish?
Well, we'll have to count them. I did teaching parish the first year I was ordained. And then I went to Franklin and didn't do teaching parish, but by the end of that year, another pastor had misbehaved. We used to have a department at the conference center, an office called Ministerial Affairs. We had so many of those, we had to change the name to Ministerial Services. And so that happened to somebody in the district where I was teaching, where I was preaching and appointed, and they had to leave teaching parish mid-year, and I took it back then, and I've had it ever since.
Roughly 15 years.
Ooh, yeah, I'd say at least 15 years.
How many teaching parish students per year?
Depends on the year, because they try to do it geographically so they don't have to drive into Emory.
So ballpark.
Usually around 10.
So 150?
Something like that.
How many are still coming back to you and asking for advice and asking for input on the church? You knew where I was going.
Well, yeah.
This is one of our shortcomings, that we have all these retired pastors
Right.
and have worked all this, that we don't go back and ask for input and help and advice. And I think that's a huge mistake of ours.
Well, I do too. I think you should use your retired clergy that are willing to be used. I would do sermons and put them on DVDs, or have my folks put them on DVDs and send them to Malone Dotson and say, help me be a better preacher, critique this for me. And they always loved that. Jimmy Thompson was another one that I very frequently used to say, I'm in this spot and I'm thinking about this, but what's the consequences if I do it this way? And so I enjoyed the retired pastors, Bishop Jones included, but let me do it to make it light. Approximately 150 new clergy that have come through Candler have been under my tutelage at some point in teaching parish. All the good ones have come back and asked my advice. So I don't know. There's a lot of them that I stay in touch with. I mean, I can start calling names, but I'd surely leave somebody out. But a lot of them have come back, and partly because it's a safe place and they don't have to worry about me running to somebody that has authority over them and you don't know what it's like for people to know that there's a bunch of people sitting around a table saying, I'm going to decide what happens to you and your family for the next year or 2 or 4. And so you're guarded against them. Sometimes you don't go to them for advice because you want them to think well of you when they're sitting at that table. And if they're homicidal or suicidal, then I've got a report. But if they're not, it's usually something that we can work through, and it provides a safe place for them. So I enjoy that very much. I enjoy that. I didn't get to talk much about Derek, but I want to tell you, Smyrna, first, that you have absolutely one of the best in the conference, and you better hang on to him because there's not many like him coming along. And if he can use this time to use his tutelage for some of the others that are coming, then that's just going to put one more good one back in the system. Derek's worked hard. He's taken some, even though he's not a female, he's been given some appointments that nobody else wanted. And he's managed them. And Whit Martin will be a much better preacher because of Derek. And so kudos to you.
I was going to ask you if you had asked God for forgiveness about being a Tech fan, but now that you've been nice to me, I can't do it to you.
You know, I'm just so thankful that Tech's colors are yellow and black and not camouflage. You know, that's one of the things that drew me to Tech. The other thing that drew me to Tech, quite honestly, is it was 99.9% male. Nursing students were 99.9% female. And they went to Agnes Scott to get the girls for the teas and the president's luncheons, and they came to the nursing school to get the girls for the prep parties, and I've been a Tech fan ever since. So, there you have it.
Anything we want to add, Adrian? Anything
Yeah,
else?
I'm going to just close us out here with a few words.
You got it.
Dr. Stowe, as always, words of wisdom, porch talk, a little humor. Thank you so much. We've enjoyed this evening. We are honored to have had you.
You are very kind, and Derek's been very kind, and so has Catherine. But it really, honestly, I mean, I have to stop right there and say, if you're called and if you're passionate about what you're doing, it's fun. And people that drag around and complain all the time and whine about what they're doing for the Lord, they need to go sack groceries. It's fun.
Adrian, let me come in one more time. So, speak to the middle school and high school girls that are going to hear this, especially at Smyrna First, that God's calling, and what you want to say to them and how you want to communicate about calling to them.
Do not hesitate. If you feel that God is calling you, pursue that calling, understand that calling, go to your pastor, go to your Sunday school teachers, go to your parents, go anywhere you need to go. But do not give up, because if you know, Bishop Fitzgerald used to tell us that. I'll tell you how old I am. If you can lay your head on the pillow and do anything else, then go do it. But if you're passionate, you won't be able to do that. And so don't think, I mean, check it out. If you think, oh, I'm too young to really know I'm being called, test the waters, and don't be afraid to. Don't be afraid to say, I think I'm being called. And if you have to retract that, no harm, no foul. But do not be afraid. Fear paralyzes you. Do not be afraid.
Great words of wisdom. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies, I hope you've enjoyed this evening, this porch talk with Dr. Stowe in this beautiful city of Covington, Georgia. We've been blessed to be with you this evening. I'd like to close us out with these words, and it's the last verse of this song that Amy and Mike Wallace sang for us earlier this evening, but I think it's really appropriate for today. So hear these words. God our Father, Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other. Lift us to the joy divine. O God our Father, Christ our brother, all who live in love are thine. Teach us how to love each other. Go in peace, and may your heart be filled with joy. Good evening.